10,000 years ago, humanity made a deal. We gave up freedom, the freedom to roam, to hunt, to live without rulers, in exchange for one thing: a reliable supply of grain. That deal gave us bread, and bread gave us cities, governments, taxes, armies, and civilization itself. But the deal had a clause: when the bread runs out, everything collapses. The French Revolution, the fall of Rome, the Arab Spring, they all started the same way, with people who couldn't afford bread. So today, we're going back to the beginning, because the history of bread isn't a food story. It's the story of how one ingredient became the operating system of human civilization. Hey, welcome to Object Origins. I'm glad you're here. This channel is all about the hidden histories behind everyday things, and it doesn't get more everyday than bread. Here's what we're covering today. First, the original deal: how the shift from hunting to farming in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 BC was essentially humanity trading freedom for flour. Then we're heading to Egypt, where bread wasn't just food, it was a paycheck. After that, Rome, where free bread became the most powerful political weapon in the ancient world. Then we hit the industrial era, where white bread somehow managed to be both a symbol of progress and a public health disaster at the same time. And finally, sliced bread. The phrase "the greatest thing since sliced bread" exists for a reason. Stay for that one, because the actual story behind it is better than the cliche. Quick note before we dive in: this video covers history, economics, and social patterns across thousands of years. The goal is to give you a clear, accurate picture of how bread shaped the world, not to oversimplify complex civilizations. With that said, let's get into it. Let's go back about 12,000 years. Before bread, before farming, humans were mobile. We followed animals, moved with seasons, and had no fixed address. Life was hard, but it was genuinely free. No landlords, no taxes, no governments telling you where to be. Then something happened in the region we now call the Fertile Crescent: modern-day Iraq, Syria, southeastern Turkey, and parts of the Levant. People there started noticing something about wild grasses, specifically wild wheat and barley. If you harvested the seeds and replanted them in one place, you didn't have to chase your food anymore. Your food stayed put. And when you figured out how to grind those seeds into flour, mix it with water, apply heat, you got bread. This was the agriculture revolution, and it changed everything. But here's what most people miss about it: it wasn't obviously a good deal at the time. Archaeological evidence suggests that early farmers actually worked harder than hunter-gatherers and had worse nutrition, at least initially. Skeletal remains from early agricultural communities show more signs of dietary deficiency and physical stress than those from nomadic groups. So why did people do it? Because grain could be stored. You could survive a bad winter, a drought, a season where the hunt failed. And once you had surplus grain, you could feed people who weren't farming: builders, soldiers, priests, administrators. In other words, surplus grain made specialization possible. Specialization made civilization possible. That's the bread deal. You give up freedom of movement. You accept that you're now tied to a piece of land. And in return, you get stability, population growth, cities, and rulers who control the grain. The history of bread, from this moment forward, is inseparable from the history of power. Fast forward a few thousand years, we're in ancient Egypt, and the pyramid builders are getting paid in bread. This is one of the most fascinating and frequently misunderstood facts in ancient history. The people who built the Great Pyramids of Giza were not slaves, at least not in the way the popular image suggests. Archaeological excavations at Giza, particularly work done since the 1990s, have revealed workers' villages, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. Records found at the site indicate that workers received daily rations of bread, beer, and meat as compensation for their labor. Bread and civilization in Egypt were essentially the same concept. Bread wasn't just sustenance, it was salary. It was the unit of economic exchange. Workers were valued, and their value was measured in loaves. Estimates from papyrus records suggest skilled workers received around 10 loaves of bread per day, with unskilled laborers receiving fewer. The Egyptians had dozens of documented bread varieties, different grains, different shapes, different purposes. Think about what that means structurally. The pharaoh's power didn't just come from divine authority, it came from controlling the grain supply. The state managed the granaries. The state issued the bread. Control the bread, you control the workforce. Control the workforce, you build monuments that last 4,500 years. And here's the thing worth sitting with: if the grain ran short, the workers stopped showing up. The power of the pharaoh, at its most fundamental level, was the power to bake bread at scale. Bread changed the world, and in Egypt, it built some of the most iconic structures humanity has ever produced. Now we move west, and forward in time, to Rome. And this is where the history of bread gets genuinely political in a way that still resonates today. Around the 2nd century AD, the Roman satirist Juvenal coined a phrase that has stuck around for 2,000 years. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The idea was cutting. Give the masses free food and cheap entertainment, and they'll stop caring about losing their political power. They'll stop asking hard questions. They'll be manageable. And Rome didn't just theorize this, they executed it at massive scale. At its height, the Roman grain dole, the annona, distributed free or heavily subsidized grain to somewhere around 200,000 to 250,000 citizens in the city of Rome alone. That's roughly a third of the city's population receiving state-supplied grain as a matter of routine. This program started as a practical response to food insecurity, but evolved into something more deliberate, a tool of political stability. Emperors who cut the grain dole faced riots. Emperors who maintained or expanded it bought loyalty. When the supply chains broke down, when grain shipments from North Africa were disrupted, the consequences were immediate and violent. Here's the thing about bread and circuses as a concept. Juvenal meant it as criticism. He was lamenting that Romans had traded civic engagement for free food. But from the government's perspective, it worked. For centuries it worked. The moment it stopped working, when the Western Roman Empire could no longer guarantee bread supply, when the infrastructure and trade routes collapsed, the whole system began to unravel. The French Revolution bread crisis, centuries later, operates on the exact same logic. When ordinary people can't access bread, when the staple food becomes unaffordable, no amount of political theater substitutes for it. Bread riots' history is, in many ways, a manual for how societies break. Let's jump to the 19th century, because this is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody sees coming. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how we made steel and textiles, it changed how we made flour. Steel roller mills, developed in the 1870s and 80s, could process grain faster and more consistently than any millstone ever had. And crucially, they could separate the bran and germ from the endosperm much more efficiently, producing a flour that was finer, whiter, and longer lasting than anything people had eaten before. White bread became a cultural phenomenon. For most of human history, white bread, soft, fine-textured, made from refined flour, was something only the wealthy could afford. Darker, coarser bread was poor people's food. So when industrial milling made white bread cheap and available to nearly everyone, it wasn't just a food development. It was a status symbol becoming democratized. White bread meant you'd moved up. White bread meant progress. Except for one problem. The refining process that made flour white also stripped it of most of its nutritional value. Removing the bran and germ meant removing significant amounts of B vitamins, iron, and fiber. Populations that shifted heavily toward refined white bread as a staple began showing higher rates of deficiency-related conditions. Physicians and nutritionists in the early 20th century started documenting these patterns, and it triggered one of the first major public health debates about processed food. The history of wheat, at this moment, splits into two tracks: the engineering of abundance and the unintended erosion of nutrition. It took several decades, and in many countries, mandatory fortification laws to course correct. To this day, most commercial white bread in developed countries is fortified with the nutrients that the milling process removes. Progress gave us more bread. It also, briefly, gave us worse bread. That tension between industrial efficiency and nutritional quality is still very much alive. And now we get to the punchline. The phrase you've heard your entire life, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Where did it come from? And why sliced bread, of all things? July 7th, 1928, Chillicothe, Missouri. A bakery called the Chillicothe Baking Company begins selling what it advertises as the greatest forward step in the baking industry since bread was wrapped. The machine that made this possible was invented by Otto Frederick Rohwedder, an Iowa-born engineer who spent over a decade developing a device that could slice a loaf of bread mechanically and wrap it automatically to keep it fresh. The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Within months, pre-sliced bread was spreading across bakeries in the United States. By 1933, just 5 years after that first sale, around 80% of bread sold in the US was pre-sliced. Now, here's the thing worth understanding. To us, sliced bread seems almost trivially simple. Of course bread should come pre-sliced. What's the big deal? But in 1928, this was genuinely transformative for the average household. It meant perfectly even slices every time. It meant sandwiches became faster and easier to make. It meant children could cut their own bread without risk. It reduced waste. It made the experience of bread, something people interacted with multiple times a day, measurably better. The phrase, "the greatest thing since sliced bread," became a genuine idiom because for ordinary people in 1928, it actually was the greatest recent thing they'd encountered in daily life. It's easy to dismiss it as a low bar, but that's exactly the point. It cleared that bar so completely, so immediately, that it became the cultural benchmark for obvious, undeniable improvement. And that, in its way, closes the loop on the whole history of bread. From a wild grass in the Fertile Crescent to a precisely sliced, machine-wrapped loaf, every step of that journey was people trying to make bread more reliable, more accessible, more controllable. The deal humanity made 10,000 years ago has been renegotiated and refined ever since. We're still, in a very real sense, living inside that original agreement. So let's bring this home. The history of bread is the history of civilization's first deal. Around 10,000 BC, people in the Fertile Crescent traded nomadic freedom for agricultural stability, and in doing so, created the conditions for every city, government, and army that followed. In Egypt, bread was literal currency. The pyramid builders were paid in loaves, and the pharaoh's power ran on grain. In Rome, bread became a political instrument. 200,000 to 250,000 people receiving free grain kept the empire stable, and when that system cracked, so did Rome. The industrial era gave us white bread as a symbol of progress, but stripped the nutrition out in the process, a reminder that efficiency and quality aren't always the same thing. And in 1928, a man named Otto Rohwedder sliced a loaf of bread with a machine, and the world declared it the greatest thing they'd seen in years. Quick reminder, everything covered in this video reflects historical research and scholarly consensus as understood today. Interpretations of ancient history continue to evolve, and this video aims to give you a clear framework, not a definitive final word. Bread and civilization are not just connected, they are, in many ways, the same story. One object, 12,000 years, and it's still on your counter. If you made it this far, genuinely, thank you. This channel is built for people who want the real story behind the things we take for granted. If bread did it for you, I think you're really going to like the next one. Next up on Object Origins, rice, the history of poverty, power, and empires. If you thought bread was political, wait until you see what rice built, and what it destroyed. That video is already up, and the link is right here. If this one earned it, subscribe, because every video on this channel follows the same format. One object, one deep dive, zero filler. I'll see you in the next one.